Coming up on this episode of Common Denominator.
And if you're going to have an animal in captivity, you better be doing everything you can to make sure that the wild cousins that it represents are being protected and that the wild habitats are being protected. And you better be investing real money into doing that. Because if the zoo is the last place that we can see these animals, then zoos as institutions have failed.
This is Common Denominator, straight-up conversations with Moshe Popak, a show that unites and empowers us all by finding common ground no matter the topic. Today, our shared love of animals. We speak with Ron Magill, the Goodwill Ambassador and Communications Director at Zoo Miami, on what makes animals so intriguing, plus his thoughts on zoos, the circus, and the best way for humans to care for animals. Now, here's Moshe.
Hi, Ron. Welcome.
Hey, Moshe, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Welcome to Common Denominator.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
So you've been doing this for 40 years. What would you say is the most fascinating thing you've learned about animals?
Oh, geez. Well, I've been doing this now. I'm in my 43rd year here now at the zoo. And, it's hard to pinpoint any most fascinating thing I've learned about animals. I think what has just been reconfirmed to me about animals is that animals have many, if not all, of the same emotions that we have. I think, there's a word called anthropomorphic, where it says that you're giving human qualities or human emotions to animals. And it says that word was kind of developed as if that's the wrong thing to do. Like animals don't feel sorrow. They don't feel happiness. They don't feel excitement. They don't feel grief. And I beg to differ with that. I think animals feel many, if not all, the emotions we feel. Many times they show it in different ways that we show it. But I'm always amazed at how animals react to things and how they can display those emotions. I think intelligence in animals is very highly underestimated. I think that there's a lot that we can learn by watching how animals interact with each other, how they deal with certain situations in nature. We should be as resourceful and as intelligent in that respect as they are in dealing with the wild.
So you talk about emotions, and I remember always hearing about dolphins, that they're a super intelligent being. What is it specifically? I always was fascinated about that. What is it specifically about dolphins that gives them this extra instinct or intelligence?
I think, first of all, when you look at the size of the brain of a dolphin, it's huge. It's actually bigger almost in relation to their body size than a human brain is. So they have this enormous capacity to obviously have knowledge, to have instinct, to have memory. They have a very intricate communication, a series of sounds and communications and clicks and sounds that they make in communicating with each other. Their ability to echolocate, their ability to display compassion. We've heard many stories. Some of them are probably exaggerated a bit, but we've heard many stories about dolphins rescuing people at sea, dolphins rescuing other animals at sea, dolphins leading people to things that they were looking for. The interactions between dolphins. I've seen that myself many times being out on the water myself, see how dolphins will interact with you on the boat and seem to be entertained by that, how they play. On a side note, they're very sexually driven. Dolphins we always hear that, sex is not something that's ever had because it feels good. It's only to procreate, to reproduce, that animals don't have sex for fun. Well, dolphins are the ones that totally blow that fear out of the water because dolphins will have sex for fun all the time. They'll have sex with each other. They'll have sex with the same sex. They'll have sex with people on a dock. I've seen dolphins. They're so titillated by the whole sexual thing. So, and I think that's another kind of parallel with people, that you see this intelligence that they tend to enjoy life. They tend to have a lot of diversity in their behaviors. Generally speaking, the more intelligent the animal, the more individual those animals can be. People have this misconception of animals, they're all the same. They're kind of DNA cookie cutter molds of each other, when the reality is that when you have an animal intelligent like a dolphin, just like a person, you can have someone who's a really great, intelligent, beautiful, compassionate person, and then you can have, a serial killer. These personality differences are also found in animals like dolphins.
Wow. Did not realize that dolphins were such pigs. Speaking of pigs, I know also the most similar, when they want to do an analysis of the human body, they always use like the pig for some reason. What is it about a pig that's also similar from the physical attributes to a human?
Well, I'm not a doctor, but I do know that they use a lot of pig organs, different types of portions of the pig that they've actually been able to transplant into humans, that have been able to be used as, whether they be different valves for the heart, different arteries, that type of stuff can be taken from a pig and actually transplanted into a human who is in desperate need of a transplant. Not that it can last forever, but it provides a bridge until a proper transplant can be done. So there's obviously some similarities there, but I'm not a medical doctor, so I can't tell you for sure. I just know of those types of transplants that have taken place.
Right. No, I've seen that. And what would you say is your favorite animal?
I get asked that question all the time. And, the politically correct thing would be the last one I worked with. But if I really had to pick a favorite animal, to surprise many, it's actually a bird. It's called the harpy eagle. It is the most powerful bird of prey in the world. I didn't see a live harpy eagle till only about 20, 30 years ago. And that was because of my wife. The only harpy eagle I'd ever seen was as a small boy. I went to the Museum of Natural History in New York. It was a place I used to immerse myself in because it's just one of the greatest museums I've ever been to. And I remember going up into the bird section and I wanted to see the bald eagle. I had not seen, I was a little boy, son of immigrant parents living in a small apartment in New York City. And I wanted to see what a bald eagle looked like. So I went to the museum to where the bald eagle was. And there was the bald eagle, beautiful bird. But right next to the bald eagle was a harpy eagle. And the harpy eagle made the bald eagle look like a pigeon. I said, oh my God, what is this thing? It looked like it must have been like an extinct, almost dinosaur type of bird. Beautiful, big crest on it, talons the size of grizzly bear claws. Just one of the most impressive, massive birds of prey I'd ever seen. And I really wanted to learn more about it. I didn't get to see my first live ones until I married my wife, and her family's from Panama. And I went down to Panama where they had a small zoo there, and I heard they had harpy eagles in that zoo. And that's where I first saw them. And to make a long story very short, I started a whole campaign to help harpy eagles in Panama, to where I built a harpy eagles. I raised the money to build a harpy eagle center in Panama, and I actually was able to convince the Panamanian Congress to make the harpy eagle the national bird of the Republic of Panama. They passed that law on April 10th, 2003, thanks to a lot of work I did with that. But that's a bird that lives in the canopy of the rainforest of tropical America, one of the most beautiful environments in the world. It's just such a beautiful, proud, impressive animal. So if I had to pick a favorite animal, it would be that, followed very closely by a cheetah. These are two animals that I've worked very closely with in the wild, with conservation programs in the wild, because I want to make something very clear. I work at a zoo for going in my 43rd year now. But in a perfect world, we wouldn't have any zoos. And I would never, ever support taking an animal out of the wild and putting it in a zoo exhibit just to put it on exhibit. The only way I'd ever support taking an animal out of the wild and putting it in a zoo is to save that individual animal's life or to save the species that it represents. And we've done that. I mean, we've done that with animals like the black-footed ferret, the Arabian oryx, the California condor. These are all animals that would be extinct had it not been for zoos and the captive breeding programs. But zoos have to do things to protect animals in the wild. We cannot be concentrating simply on building multi-million-dollar exhibits for people to come see here with animals in captivity. And what zoos want you to say now is they don't want to use the word captivity anymore. They say under human care. Listen, that's just semantics, okay? The animal's in captivity. Okay, it is under human care, but it's in captivity. So, they're trying to use semantics now to soften the words. But the bottom line is they're in captivity. And if you're going to have an animal in captivity, you better be doing everything you can to make sure that the wild cousins that it represents are being protected and that the wild habitats are being protected. You better be investing real money into doing that. Because if the zoo is the last place that we can see these animals, then zoos as institutions have failed. Their number one priority should be to help ensure that there is a wild for these animals to live in.
But I know the mere fact that you've worked for Zoo Miami for 43 years, you truly believe that Zoo Miami gets it right. And we'll talk about that soon. I want to go to something you were saying before, because my wife and I would go back and forth. And I know Ringling Brothers, they stopped having animals in their circus. And you talk about animals having emotions. And my wife says to me the other day, she's like, maybe the animals do like being, whatever captivity, because maybe it goes to that theory that they have that emotion, and maybe they like that interaction with humans. And that was a question mark that she was saying.
Sure, I think some of that can go to extremes. First of all, there's an old saying that says you can take an animal out of the wild, you cannot take the wild out of an animal. Animals that enjoy being with people, generally speaking, are domesticated animals that over thousands of years have been under human care and have learned to be domesticated. When you talk about a circus, you're taking an animal and many times making it do things that are instinctively against its natural instincts. You don't take a tiger that's a solitary animal and force it to be next to other tigers on a bunch of stools and make it jump through flaming hoops, of which it instinctively is naturally afraid of fire. So these things are just exhibitions of domination. They're not exhibitions of compassion for an animal. And whether an animal looks good because you're feeding it well and it's got a good body weight does not mean that it's mentally right. So whereas I don't have issues if you're taking a domestic horse and domestic dogs and doing a wonderful dog and pony show with trained animals that work very well and are well cared for because they've been domesticated. However, to take a tiger or a lion or elephants and put them in conditions that are not natural to them and obviously not beneficial to their health is just counter to what we should be doing as a human race. And don't get me wrong, I went to circuses as a kid. I enjoyed them. I said, wow, look at the tiger, because I didn't know better. It's a matter of education. So you may have that exception where an animal seems to thrive. And listen, the bottom line is this: most animals in a good zoo will live a longer life than they would in the wild. They're protected from predators. They're protected from disease, from parasites. They live much longer under human care than they would in the wild. But we also have to look at certain individuals like elephants. Elephants don't live longer under human care than they do in the wild. Okay, animals like cetaceans, like dolphins and killer whales, things like these animals need huge. They're pelagic, they're nomadic. They need huge areas to survive in a proper environment. So to force them to be in captivity for no other reason than to entertain people, I can't go with that. I just cannot go with that.
And I want to just tell you, it's so interesting because two of the most amazing experiences. One was when I was in Wyoming. It was wintertime a few years ago, and I'm with my kids and I'm doing a tour around the federal land, and I look up at the tree and I see, because in my mind, my favorite idea is about the eagle. You were talking about the eagle before. So the eagle, while all other birds fly downward, the eagle flies towards the sun alone in my mind. And all of a sudden I see two eagles on a tree, and the tree has just a couple branches. And I'm like, oh my God, there's bald eagles right there. And it just stuck in my mind. And my other amazing experience was about 7 years ago in Tanzania, in safari, in the nature, and watching how fast. And the guide said, it'll be very hard to find a cheetah, but we may find it. An hour later, there it was. We spotted a cheetah, and it was tremendous watching those two. So I definitely relate to that. Definitely relate to that.
You know, I've been to Africa 54 times now, and worked with cheetahs in the wild, and they never cease to amaze me. And it's the misconceptions that people have about cheetahs that amaze me, in the sense that, anybody sees a spotted African cat and they think it's going to kill them. They think it's out to kill them. It's a dangerous animal. Couldn't be further from the truth when you speak about a cheetah. There's never been a documented account of a cheetah attacking a human being in the wild, except for one cheetah that had rabies in Kenya. That was it. Cheetahs will run away from any type of threat they have. They get killed by everything: lions, hyenas, leopards. They get killed by so many things. So their only asset is their speed. Being the fastest land animal, an animal that go from 0 to 60 in 4 seconds is pretty fast. That's their only asset. They're an incredibly misunderstood animal. And because of that, they're one of the most highly endangered animals in Africa now. They are the most endangered cat in Africa. So, it's just my goal is to try to educate people, to get them to appreciate. There's an old saying that says, in the end, we protect what we love what we understand, and we understand what we're taught. And I look at that as really the backbone of my job, to help teach people to understand animals so that they can learn to love them.
So how did this love for animals start for you?
It was just a thing. I grew up, again, I was the son of an immigrant parents in New York City, a small apartment. The kids today, I tell them all the time, they're so lucky. They've got this plethora of great programming. We've got, National Geographic Channel, Animal Planet, the Discovery Network. You got all this great programming. When I was a kid, there was one show. It wasn't a network. It was one show. It was on at 7:30 on Sunday nights, right before the Wonderful World of Disney. It was called Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. That show was like going to church for me. It was like a religion. I'd watch that show. We only had a little 12-inch black and white television set in our home at that time. And I'd watch that show and I'd dream about what it was like to see those animals in the wild. And again, I'm watching on a little black and white television. I'm not even seeing them in color. But I'm thinking, what it's like to see them in color, to smell, to feel that area. It was a seed that was planted in me that was just so powerful that then became fertilized by my trips to the zoo. To see at the Bronx Zoo, to see these animals in real life, to make those eye-to-eye connections. That's why I understood the value of zoos. You see, I normally would not be a fan of keeping animals in captivity. Like I said in the beginning, I would never support taking that just to make them an exhibit. But having said that, I understand the value of providing these very important windows into the world of the wild, where kids like myself, who are living in a city, who wouldn't have the opportunity to go to Africa to see a lion and go to, Brazil to see a jaguar or the Arctic to see a polar bear, you'd be able to see that in real life. And something happens when you look, at least for me it did. When you look at an animal eye to eye, there's a connection that happens there. And that seed just grew into this massive, just awe for animals and wildlife that I wanted to work with them. I wanted to do something. Initially, I thought I wanted to be a veterinarian until I took my first chemistry class and I realized, well, I got to come up with plan B. But that's what planted the seed in me. And I always knew that I wanted to work with wildlife.
So now you've been at Zoo Miami on your 43rd year.
43rd year.
What specifically do you do at the zoo?
Well, now basically I'm a storyteller, to be honest with you. I started here as a zookeeper. Working my way up, I became a lead keeper. I became a senior zookeeper. I became a zoological supervisor. I became an assistant curator. And then I kind of evolved into this spokesperson, goodwill ambassador, director of communications for the zoo. So what I am, I'm kind of the liaison to the media. I tell the stories. I also work on a variety of different conservation programs that I support. I was the one here who started the first conservation endowment here. The Ron Magill Conservation Endowment is what I'm most proud of in my entire professional career. And it stemmed from the fact that I believe zoos need to be doing more for conservation in the wild. I'll be honest with you. I could not continue working here had it not been for me being able to establish the Ron Magill Conservation Endowment. Because for me, as I said, if we're not protecting animals in the wild, and what we were building these multi-million-dollar exhibits, and because of budget constraints, they weren't allotting any kind of money to protect those animals in the wild. I said, to me, it's hypocritical. You're building these multi-million-dollar exhibits and you're not putting money to protect them in the wild. What does that tell you? And out of frustration, I said, I'm just going to start an endowment. And management said, oh, sure. Quite honestly, between you and I don't think they believed I could. Quite frankly, I didn't think I believed I could. I was just so angry. I said, I got to do something. So I said, I'm just going to go out and try to raise money. Now, fortunately, I'm not a person that can ask for money. I just don't feel comfortable ever asking for money. But because I do a lot of television, a lot of radio, I had connected myself with some very successful, affluent people. And they heard about my passion for this wildlife and my passion to start an endowment. There was one person in particular, I'm not going to mention his name because he likes to remain anonymous, who really helped me and guided me creating this endowment, gave me the seed money to start the endowment. And then people just joined in. And, now I've raised millions for an endowment. And each year I give away tens of thousands of dollars only to be used for conservation in the wild. And that's what sustains me. If I wasn't able to do that, and the way it's set up is that if I die tomorrow, every year, tens of thousands of dollars will go into wild conservation because it was set up as an endowment, set up basically kind of like as a pension for wildlife conservation. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to have something that's sustainability. When people ask me, they go, well, what do you want your legacy to be? My legacy, I want it to be that we're taking care of animals in the wild, not in the zoo.
Truly amazing. What are some of the top 2 or 3 conservation efforts that you're the most proud of?
Well, the harpy eagle is number one because I was able to change the mentality of a nation. When you go to a country and nobody even knew what a harpy eagle was when I went there. And by the time I was done, they made it their national bird. And it's something that the whole nation takes pride in. That I got a call from the president of the nation, that I got a letter from the United States president congratulating me on being able to achieve that. I mean, Panama gave me the key to the city. It was a huge, when I started that program, I was just a zookeeper. And what that taught me is that, if you really believe in something, you can get it done. So I'm most proud of that. I'm secondly very proud of the Cheetah Ambassador program that I started here at the zoo with cheetahs and raising hundreds of thousands of dollars for cheetah conservation in South Africa and in Kenya. I bought vehicles for cheetah research in South Africa. I bought vehicles for cheetah research in Kenya, the Masai Mara. These are things I'm really proud of, to be able to provide the tools to conservationists who are doing the groundwork. You asked me in the beginning, what do I do? And I said, I'm basically a storyteller now. When I started working at the zoo, most people worked with animals because they didn't want to work with people. They weren't really people, people, so to speak. That's changed a little bit now because with the advent of social media, everybody wants their face on TV. They want to get likes. They want to get all this stuff. Everybody's looking, look at me, look at me, look at me. So that attitude's changed a little bit, but I think sometimes for the wrong reasons. I see things happening on social media, people doing things with animals on social media just for the sensationalistic effect, just for the more likes, look at me, look at me, look at me. And it's all the wrong reasons. They're exploiting wildlife. They're using wildlife just to get attention. I think it's the wrong reason. But having said that, when I started, I was lucky because I like talking to people and I loved working with animals. So I like being that storyteller, telling those stories, trying to connect people. And that's what I do now. Now I don't work as much directly with the animals anymore, but I tell the story of the people who do. And it's very important that people understand that.
So how does Zoo Miami specifically, what are the things on a sustainable basis to ensure that the animals are treated right from a practical perspective?
Well, we're an accredited institution by the AZA, Association of Zoos and Aquariums. And that accreditation is it's the gold standard for zoos. We get inspected on a regular basis. And the bar that's set by the AZA is higher than the bar set by Fish and Wildlife, by Florida Wildlife Conservation. It is the highest bar ever. So, there are many, many, many animal institutions in this country. I think well over 1,000. I think it might be well over 2,000, as a matter of fact, of which only about 200 of them are accredited. So we're one of those. We're very proud of that. And to be accredited, you have to be doing certain things for conservation. You have to be providing certain benefits, enrichment for the animals that live here. You have to have a certain extent of veterinary care, veterinary hospitals. All those tools have to be in effect to pass accreditation by the AZA. So that is really the gold standard that we have to live by. And, we do a good job doing so.
So my wife and I were having a conversation the other day, and it came out that she was afraid of snakes. And I wondered, are you born with that fear? What is it about, like, kind of snakes and spiders and scorpions that just people are naturally afraid of that?
I think, to be honest with you, almost all of those fears are learned behavior. And they've done studies with kids, with things like snakes and spiders. And actually, they're more curious than afraid. It's not until they see the reaction of their parents or they see the reaction of adults or they see something on the media that they learn to be afraid of things. So it is not an instinctive thing, though. The fear of snakes, I think, is one of the top 5 fears in the world. It is, in fact, a learned behavior. And they've done that study, especially with kids and snakes. When you see kids, a year old, 2 years old, haven't learned anything, and they actually go to grab, they go to curious. They're curious about it. They're not inherently afraid of it. So most of these fears are learned behaviors that are either cultural or just by, responding to the reaction you see from your parents or family.
Because it's interesting, because as I became an adult, did I understand that obviously there's venomous snakes and there's non-venomous, and
most of them are non-venomous.
And most of them are non. That's right. That's right. It took a while, but I wanna really thank you for the work you're doing at Zoo Miami. I'm planning, hopefully, also to go back to Africa with my older kids in a few months from now. And I love spending time in nature. So thank you so much. But how could people find out about the work that you're doing, the endowment, and the work you're doing at Zoo Miami?
Well, you can go to the Zoo Miami website, zoomiami.org, and it will give you a lot of the work. Go to the conservation that the zoo's doing. You can go to my personal website, ronmagill.org, www.ronmagill.org, and I'll tell you about the Conservation Endowment and what I'm doing with the Conservation Endowment. You can, come to the zoo, support the zoo. You can make a tax-deductible donation to my endowment. It's basically an investment in conservation for the future. It's something I take great pride in. And again, when you make a donation to that endowment, your money doesn't get spent. It gets put into a corpus that then produces dividends that goes on. So you're not really making a donation as much as you're making an investment. And that's important. It's important that there's another old saying that I like that says, we have not inherited this earth from our parents, we're borrowing it from our children. And I think we have a moral obligation to protect it for them and for future generations. And that's the whole purpose of this endowment.
Well, thank you so much, Ron. It's really been a pleasure. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Take
so
care.
much.
Thanks for listening to the Common Denominator podcast. Join us next week for another inspiring, impactful, and empowering conversation. To learn more about Moshe, head to MoshePopak.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, feel free to share it, and we'd be grateful if you could rate, review, and subscribe to the show. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you again soon.